And with that, volume down. Yes. So we're here to talk about what makes an idea worth exploring. We are missing a panelist, Suzanne Palmer, Hugo winner, Suzanne Palmer, who is unfortunately stuck somewhere on the highway. We don't know where. She may be able to arrive late. Probably is going to miss it. And I wish that things were otherwise, but the traffic gods were not kind to her today. So we are going to talk about what makes an idea worth exploring. In the panel description, I'll undergo this ritual. How do you go from idea to story? Is one idea enough, or do you need more than that? What elements make a compelling story? Which is, that's a panel on its own, I think. Our panel authors and editors will talk about ways to develop an idea and recognize the signs that your idea just isn't enough. And I don't know, is anyone here an editor? I don't know, maybe Suzanne was an editor, I don't know. So you're definitely gonna get the author's point of view. So kind of to kick things off is, what to you stands out when you have an idea? And Walter John Williams has, it's not a famous saying, I'm trying to make it famous. Ideas are easy, pages are hard. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I have more ideas than I will ever be able to write in my likely lifespan. So what is kind of the first side to you that an idea is like, this is something I want to roll with. I want to take it and progress it further. And why don't we start in the end with Jen?
For me, an idea becomes worth doing when I have a character. I'm very character focused. I can't get into it. It's like I can have like well, that would be kind of a neat thing. But until I know who is the central person that this is about, it doesn't have anything. And it has to kind of do I don't know if anybody's ever played Katamari Damacy, where it's like this little ball and it rolls around and it picks up stuff. And that's kind of like, to me, like a single idea kind of needs to pick up enough to make a person and have a problem, and then a setting, and then all of these things kind of spiral with it.
So for me, ideas are spawned by just about anything. I had an idea that what's the next thing the government could likely want to cut? And I had the idea that they would cut education if they could. So I wrote a story about what would happen if when kids turn 12, government said they could just get the education free on the internet. And then I came up with a story around that idea. I tend to look for what's puzzling to me and what would happen if, because science fiction is supposed to be warning us of cautionary tales. And I tend to like the Twilight Zone approach to ideas.
Tavair?
So I dabbling in both music and poetry and going into short fiction. I am finally able to like unpack all of the ideas that I've ever had because of broadening my writing spectrum, which has been very nice. But with that, I've learned that I can't keep everything because there's just no time to be able to catch up with all the ideas. So it's been nice, kind of like you saying, having a focus to be able to have just what I feel I write easiest. What I'm drawn to the most, what keeps me engaged with my feelings.
And since there's only the four of us, I'll chip in. Usually we moderators try to just manage the conversation, but similarly, like I draw ideas from everywhere, and sometimes they come at really odd times, which is going to lead to the question here. Back in 2017, I had been at the Nebula conference, and somebody gave a 5-minute talk. They were doing a series of 5-minute talks. And so you had 20 slides and 5 minutes to talk about them. And this person talked about search dogs and how that worked. And which was a really fascinating thing. And, 5 minutes, obviously you just scratched the surface of that. And I'm driving on my way to writing group a couple of weeks later, and I'm listening to the Sword and Laser podcast. And they're talking about one of Werner Vinch's works, which involves smart dogs. And now, suddenly, I'm driving down Route 29 here in Maryland, for those familiar, on my way to Columbia, and I have this vision of an intelligent, pack-minded, smart dog hang gliding in to perform a search and rescue operation. And that image came to me, which then led to having to develop the problem around that. So when you get that initial image, and Jen, you started with that, like you have a person and a problem. Is that the only way that you get these, or like, do you ever have a setting that kind of assists, or is it always that kind of person and problem trigger?
I will have like a pool. I call it my idea pool, and I just put random things in there, and eventually they will stick, and something will be like, we'll come together, and it'd be like, oh, I've got this idea for a person and this idea for a setting, and let me put them together. And or I'll pick something up and I'll think about it of, okay, who is the person who would be most affected by this? And that's where I take like those kind of what if ideas the DH does, is like, okay, so who would be most affected by education being taken away by the government, kind of thing. And try to kind of play with that. And that's how I get into it. But again, until I have to keep poking at it until a person appears or a main character appears. I don't have to be a person. I have written, from dog's point of view too. So.
I did that, and that was actually really fun.
Yeah.
It was a really interesting exercise.
Yeah, I'm a little jealous because I don't visualize, so I don't get images in my head. I have to just sit there and talk it to myself until things happen.
And I visualize. So when I was a junior in college, I was overseas, and I was daydreaming on a public bus between two cities. And I came up with an idea for a series. And then I spent the next 20 years writing 11 books in it. It came to me kind of dreamlike. And often things will happen to me, like there'll be an anthology call. And I go, oh, that's there's just no way I would have a story for that. Unless, and then I run with that idea. I'm a pantser, a discovery writer. So if something like, there's just no way I could write a story about a purple unicorn. And then I did the weirdest purple unicorn story I could come up with. Now, it didn't get published, but I laughed a lot.
Tavair, and I'm curious because again, you're a musician as well. Do those things come to you in visual, audio? Do you get what other sensory inputs maybe come along with those?
Yeah, so sometimes I'll just be hanging out with Astrid. That's my guitar that I have with me today, and we'll just be cooking up words and spitting out things. I'll be looking underneath the stars and be talking about something random happening out there on the stars, as more of like an expressive, just vomit, if you will, if I could use that. But also part of my series, the Sagacious Traveler series, like yours, once you kind of have this formulation of a foundation, that you're like, oh man, I could make this a series. I could keep going. And that series is about traveling back to my younger self, which shout out to Back to the Future series. Hop in my DeLorean with me. That's why I always say when I get to play these songs and go to this part of my life where I wanted to give this piece of advice to myself. And so it is nice to be able to have kind of a series to bounce off of. It's in a way an idea pool. And if you have like that kind of foundation, like I really like to cook off of that many a times.
So and again, we talked about like all of us have a lot more ideas than we can do anything with. What hits you, or what point do you reach? Maybe Jen, expand a little bit on what you talked about earlier, where you go, okay, this is something that I want to. This is something that's worth my effort and time to develop further, even if it's only, I guess, for self-satisfaction. Is DH your unicorn story? Although I'm sure you hope to publish that somewhere, but
I got rejected.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So I did submit.
Okay, so it wasn't just I'm going to write this for fun and just But what level, what are the necessary elements, or how developed does it have to be? Or is there a varying scale depending on maybe the scale of the idea or scale of the work that you have in mind for it?
For me, a lot of it depends on like what I'm doing with it. Like if I'm writing for an anthology, then obviously I'm trying to, fit whatever theme to the anthology. But, and often the latest idea is the shiniest idea. So that is one I want to work on right now, and develop. And then the other ones just kind of get shoved away so that my brain stops obsessing on them and I can get other stuff done. But a lot of it, because when I'm sitting down to think about it, it's like, what is it I want to say? Like, how do I want this character's problem to be solved? And like, what do I, I'm not saying like my stories are necessarily teaching stories, but every story is meant to evoke an emotion or, some kind of lesson love. I'm much more of a happy, like I like people to come away with hope. So, like, how does this character go from their life being utter crap to having hope again? And a lot of times that just depends on what kind of, is it science fiction, is it fantasy, and, what the problem is that they're facing. And then I just get to play with trying to figure out to solve it. I'm a pantser too, so I'm just like, I never know how this, I'm like, I hope you fix this.
For me, as a pantser or discovery writer, as Dean Wesley Smith calls it,
Mhm.
when I'm writing, I will suddenly write something and go, oh, that's what this is about.
Mm.
Oh, that's what I need to change. Yeah.
I mean, I know what a cancer is, but people watching this virtually may not know the difference between cancer and water.
So the question is, for the people who are online, the difference between a pantser and a plotter. A plotter outlines. The first time I wrote a novel, I outlined. Now, I wasn't a deep outliner. There are people who will outline every chapter, every subplot, everything going on everywhere. A pantser writes by the seat of their pants and discovers their story, kind of like a piece of wood that a sculptor is just cutting into and go, oh, I didn't know I was making a goat. It's like, oh, I was making a goat the whole time. A goat was hidden in the wood. I didn't know that. That's what pantsers often find. And pantsers can get in a lot of trouble by being pantsers because they may end up having to rewrite an entire book because they realized they took a tangent that wasn't the best choice as they went down. There's also a bit of a difference when you're a pantser in writing short fiction versus a novel. You can fix a lot of things when you're writing novel length. When you've got only 5,000 words to deal with or 10,000 words to deal with, you have to make sure that every line is where it needs to be. And you can be a pantser, but you're going to be cutting out a lot and rewriting and rewriting.
I think
I'm going to disagree with you on that.
Okay.
I don't want to derail the panel, but I'm a structured pantser is what I call myself because I write to a story structure. So I know what the beats of the story are going to be. I use story grid method. Other people use other things, beat sheets or whatever. But so I actually don't have to throw away a lot because I kind of know I know where I'm supposed to be going and I'm just along for the ride and I'll figure it out as I go. But I don't feel like I have to throw out a lot. Sometimes I'll get usually I'll figure out after the first scene if it's going to work or not. So
I 2 points. One is it's important to note, I think, that that's not a binary between.
No, it is not.
There's
it
absolutely a
is very
spectrum.
much a structure.
Lois McMaster-Bujold has famously talked about how her outlines are basically a first draft.
Yeah.
Like they're all
Yeah.
but a first draft.
A lot of
and
people,
other people literally sit and write as you say.
Yeah.
The other point, I'm sorry, I'll finish this and I'll let you get. for more talk about structure, Sunday at 1 p.m. in the Club Lounge, Jen and I and some other folks will be talking about structuring stories.
Yeah.
So, and I'm also a story grid person.
cool.
If you all, can I come up to hot?
Yep,
Tavair?
go for
You
it,
guys-
go for it.
Okay,
I
so,
could get derailed, don't let me.
and you talked about you basically, especially with the music, you have kind of a stream of consciousness. What with that or with your poetry or your writing gets you, oh, this is a line I want to follow. This, oh, I've got a good hook here. I want to like build something around this. What kind of triggers that?
I'm a very feeling-based writer. So if that feeling kind of feels exercised in a way that I've like got it out of me enough, sometimes it's just that. And that's when it like I sometimes consolidate it into a poem and say, all right, this is just a pocket thing. Also frustration. I'm a very like conserve my energy kind of person. So once I am uber frustrated with an idea, I'm like, cool, that's not something I want to, mess around with anymore. But and I do want to make a difference here. Frustration and challenge aren't the same thing in my book. A challenge comes readily with something that you want to work on and explore and have that little bit of frustration with, but just being frustrated with a piece, is kind of when I begin to push it to the side.
And you perfectly set up my next question. Thank you for that. We're obviously sharing the same cartoon balloon here over our heads.
Absolutely.
How do you know when it's a dead end and that this is not something that you like? Maybe you pursued it. Maybe it looked like it was a good thing at first, and then you get to that point where it's like, nah, this isn't working. I'll share an experience I had recently where the book that I'm working on currently, I realized it was not working. I was having difficulty writing. And it came to me that it wasn't that the whole project was a dead end, is that I was actually writing it from the wrong point of view, or I was emphasizing the wrong points of view, which is a whole other side of things. But maybe you come up with you have an idea as you're writing, and even this does happen to structured and outlining writing, which I am more of a plotter, that you can get these things, and when you realize partway through, no, this doesn't work. What point do you get to at? Tavair, do you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah,
And then we'll
absolutely.
work our way down.
I think of it kind of like going to find a product. The first place I'm going to look is probably going to be the thrift store. And if I don't find a used version of it, I'll go to something newer, to like the Walmart. And it's like, oh, I can't find my pants there. And if that's exhausted, then I'm kind of done. So it's like that with my ideas, I get to a point where the recycled is not working, then I need to come up with something fresh. And if that doesn't work, then, it's kind of exhausted the two avenues that I go to.
PH or Jen, when do you realize, or what are the triggers for you that this isn't going to go and I need to at least park it, if not throw it out?
I have a lot of the same thing that you were talking about with like the point of view. Like for me, when I'm getting into something, I have to get the voice right. I have to know the character. And if I don't know the character, then I have to keep starting over and trying different places and trying different angles until something clicks. But if I get like halfway through a story and I'm bored with it, that to me, that's kind of like where the frustration comes in, like the difference between the challenge and frustration. Oh, this is not a hard scene to write. This is just freaking boring me. It's going to bore everybody. There's nothing interesting. And either that case, I have to take a step back and figure out like, what did I do to make my character boring? Did they not have enough drive or something to get them, go pro tag, come on. Or is it just like, I've been going to something and it isn't something that, it interests me anymore. It's like, oh, I thought this was interesting, but there's not really anything to explore here that makes it interesting for me.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point that if as the creator you're bored with it, the reader is going to be bored, obviously, or the listener. Like, this is not something. Yeah, if I don't, and I've hit the same thing, which is great when going through, it's kind of like with the part of the story grade where if you see a scene that doesn't advance something
Mhm.
one way or another,
Right.
it doesn't help the story. Well, sometimes you need the exposition scene. Yeah, that's fine. But other times it's like, oh, I can whack these 3,000 words. Oh, now I can go for 3,000 more.
Sit there and navel gaze for 20,000 words.
Yeah.
It's just not allowed.
Or at least not in our genre generally. Literary fiction is a little different.
I'm like, oh my God, character, do something.
It's time for a car chase or an explosion.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, what do you do if you get an idea that won't leave you alone? And we kind of touched on this because and sometimes this can happen mid-work. Like,
Yeah.
fortunately, the time it happened for me was mid-work and it was related. I had a character that needed to have I had this setup in the story was they needed to have a mentor character. And I had written the mentor character into a different place. And it was like, oh, I really need to create. And out of the ether, like Athena from Zeus's skull, comes Auntie New, who I have described as Betty White Nigerian space detective, who is, which I think is an accurate description, and she takes over not the whole story, but she replaces the character who was originally supposed to be the mentor character, and then also drove the previous POV character out to become a secondary character and becomes one of the three primary protagonists. And this happens 15,000 words into the first draft. So have you ever had that kind of thing happen where, and what if it's an idea that's not related to the work? Why don't you talk about the ones that happen with the work first, and then what happens when it's something that's not with the work you're trying to get done, that you're maybe on a deadline for?
This is my friend. I have notebooks everywhere. I have learned that like the ideas will bother me if I don't record them somewhere. I have to brain dump them and sometimes I'll write like a bunch of stuff, like here's some snippets of dialogue, here's some imagery, here's some, all of this stuff. I will do what I can to get it out of my brain because then my brain is like, okay, you've recorded it, you can come back to it. And that's if it's not shinier, then I try very hard not to let it be shinier than what I'm trying to finish because then I never finish anything. But so that helps me a lot. I mean, even if and then if it's something that's for the work in progress, if it's not for the section I'm working on, I have what I call a knock list. And I just put it down on the knock list to go back and add it or to add it in when I get to that section of the story. You know, it's like, oh, it'll be really cool if she has this, but I have to make sure that I go back 2 chapters and put it in there, or, you know, however much. So my note is my friend. I put notes in my phone. I dictate notes while I'm walking the dogs. Although a lot of times I have to cut out the don't eat that grass. The dogs. But, you know, I try to record it everywhere. And then if it is a really good idea, really something, it will come back to me and it's something I will noodle on. I'd have to spend a lot of time, you know, it'll just be in the background. It'll come up and I'll think about it a little bit, maybe make some more notes and stuff, but it keeps it from overwhelming me.
Tavair?
Pose that question one more time for us. I always get lost in. I love it because I for so many years, if I could just derail for a second, so many years I've always been that person that is thinking while other people is talking, and so it's been really good to be a panelist because I've been lending my ears to you guys. But then I forget the question.
Yeah, that's quite all right. Yeah. So the question is, what happens when you get an idea that won't leave you alone? And maybe first, like, what if it's something that's related? Well, either way, however you want to tackle this, either it's something related to the work you're on, or it's something that is intrusive that isn't related to what you're working on. But, you know, how do you deal with that? Maybe there's different ways, because sometimes you got the freedom to play, and other times you have to finish this thing because the editor wants it in 24 hours.
Yeah, a fellow speculative poet, we always kick back and forth. What's the idea that wakes you up at night? And you know, like you said, having that notebook and just like being able to have a place to push it out has been very effective for me, as well as knowing when something is an ear bug versus something is just I have to explore it. You know, do little ditties and tunes all the time, and knowing when it's just a 30 seconds versus like, wow, this is something that I really, really like. It's been in my mind riding the bus or in the car. I've been whistling and, this idea for XYZ. Sometimes as well, I notice myself quoting something or sharing the idea with others. And usually if you want to share it with somebody else, you should explore it. It's uber wonderful to be like, oh, how crazy would this be if, and then like, oh, well, go ahead and hop up in that.
Gotcha. You talked a little bit about like storing your ideas, and having notebooks and phones. I live and die by Evernote, and I've lately become a big fan of Obsidian, which is a great tool for kind of capturing random thoughts. And I like that it's just marked up text for the technically oriented, and so that you're not trapped into a product, so that if the product goes belly up, you're lost because it's all text files, and so something else should be able to consume that. What other tools do you maybe make use of? Do you record your stuff while you're playing, or do you like only intermittently like, oh, this is really good, let me switch on the recorder function?
Yeah, so like you were saying, that dictation is super helpful. I use Notes a lot. Google has, of course, a really good dictation feed as well. ChatGPT, I use that quite frequently to alter ideas, to get them to at least some sort of basis of alternative. Sometimes like for example, if I don't want to use that same word because I just feel like it's overused in a specific song, I'm like, okay, well, ChatGPT, what's 15 things that could be an alternative to this, and not using it as an entirety for the structure, but just kind of like a compass. So that's the two of the tools that I use the most.
So you're using it like a thesaurus, basically.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just so, if you know how to talk with it, it can give you exactly what you're looking for as an artist. But if you don't, you're just kind of poking around on Google, Yeah.
So Jen, if you could, and DH, just so you can think about this while Jen responds, we're talking about ways that you keep track of the things, the ideas that you have, what kind of tools do you use and make use of? Or if you're ready to respond now, but Jen, I think maybe you can expand on what else you do, or if there's anything specific.
I use Obsidian as well. That is a really good one. Like I said, the notebooks. Sometimes I'll just put it in Apple Notes in my phone and then move it to Obsidian later, depending on, what I have with me. And a lot of time, like having that extra step allows me to kind of process it. Like, do I really want to put this in there? Is this just like, especially if it's something I wrote down like right when I wake up. And I'm like, oh, there's a boy and he likes a girl. And I'm like, really, that's what I wrote? But yeah, I use Obsidian and stuff. And it's funny because like I don't usually go pulling through that as much as I like, unless like I have like, oh, I want to write for this anthology, but I don't have an idea for this theme, I will play around with the things in my idea file, but usually I put them in there, and if they're important enough, they resurface when I have time to work on them. And sometimes I like to give myself playtime, like I'm just going to play, and I'm going to put my other thing away and think about that, and I'm just going to play for an hour or two with this other story idea. So,
And I'm a Luddite. I will write a note to myself. Maybe I've had a dream in the middle of the night and it scared me, and I go, oh, that was good. Because it's difficult if you don't write it down or leave yourself some way of messaging yourself that you can remember that. I'll just write notes, and a lot of times ideas just percolate in the back of my head for years. And I may try to write something and it doesn't take me where I want to go, so I stop and I work on something else. And then I go, oh, that's what I needed to do back on what I was working on yesterday. And I hop back over to that, because sometimes there is value in switching gears. So your mind goes to a different place. So what you didn't know that you were working on becomes clear to you. Oh, that was it. So
Yeah.
that's the Luddite approach. to,
Yeah, I have found that different tools work better for me at different times and different
Mhm.
phases of the process. So for example, if I'm just pure brainstorming, I have done a fair bit of this at, well, I did pre-pandemic at what used to be a pirate bar here near here. And, sit there with a couple of glasses of rum and my notebook. And I found that working with pen and paper
Mhm.
or pencil and paper, because sometimes I'd be sketching something out. Not that I'm an artist by any means, but like sometimes you just need to like put the visual elements down so you can
Mhm.
understand the relationships better. That works better for me doing that than sitting in front of a keyboard at a computer. Other times, like if I'm doing other particular things, like I'm fine to do it while I'm, working through things. Do you have that experience? Like, are there at DH? It sounds like it's always going to be written down somewhere, but
So I often will daydream. Now, I will not state I'm daydreaming at work because that would be totally inappropriate. But just chilling out and just letting my mind roam can often help me visualize an idea I want to work on, or a thought about where something needs to go next. It's one of the reasons why I feel like I'm much more a discovery writer and not a plotter at all. And why, for me, rewriting is not a terrible thing. I'm happy to have my writing evolve and my story evolve with where I'm going, because, a lot of people say they'll write 9 drafts. I don't write 9 drafts in the way that I think of 9 drafts. I'm writing the first draft, I'm going further down, and then I go back to where I started, and then first paragraph is changed, and then the second paragraph is changed. I stop, go back to the first paragraph, and work my way through. So the last thing I write is the least edited, but by then I'm in the zone.
Mhm.
So it's all a gestalt for me.
so what do I do here? I had another thought which I need to come back to. Actually, we'll come to this first. So things that make one of the questions in the description is what makes for a compelling story. We talked a little bit about that, about like needing a person, a problem. One of the things that makes me a plotter is I need to know the ending or an ending. It's not always the one that I end up with by the time I reach a story, although usually they're pretty close. But that's something, in order for me to pursue it, I have to know what's going to happen, which I have other friends who are discovery writers, pantsers, who are like, for them, that's totally breaks. Like if they know how it ends, they can't sit down to write it anymore because it's not, they don't get that exploration of the journey. What are the kind of elements that you have to have, or that make it compelling to you to continue on?
For me, I don't need to know the ending per se, although usually I figure that out partway through of like kind of the big picture of the ending, but I need to know what my story question is.
Mm.
So, an example, like, if I was writing a mystery, there's a dead body, the story ends when we figure out who killed them. And so I have to have that kind of idea. It's like, is the character going to accomplish what their goal is? And so I have to know what their goal is, and then I can know when it's going to end is if they get it or they irreversibly can't get it. So that to me, it's like that's the driver. I have to know that narrative drive of what it is the character wants. And then I can start throwing obstacles in the way. And thus I know what the question is that I have to answer by the end of it, or I'll never end.
Either of the two of you?
What's the word again? Pantser?
Mhm.
Right on. I like that. I can imagine somebody. Anyway,
Well, it's more by the seat of your pants is where it came from, but
in doing that, I do much of that the same. And many of times, I think you said it, Jen, that you get distracted sometimes, and you go a little too far off of your trail. And so like when I look at whatever it is, my poem or my songs, I want to make sure like it makes sense to me, because that's how I know that I've went too far off, is I'm like, oh, what was I doing in the first place about this piece? And that like I know it won't make sense to somebody else, because my mind, has 50 different train tracks crossing all at the same time. And if it doesn't make sense to me, it's not going to feel good to somebody else being confused.
So I don't write poetry. Except one time I did, and it got published. Okay. Now, the idea came out of a college music appreciation class. It was the folktale behind Beethoven's Fifth.
Mm.
So I wrote the folktale and integrated the beats of the music into a poem.
Mm.
And there were people who heard Beethoven's Fifth playing in my poem. And there are people who had no idea what I was talking about. But the ones who got it go, I can't believe what you made me go through. I heard Beethoven's Fifth. And then the idea of the Elf King, who is death knocking on the door, dum bum 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 bum, like the knocking you're hearing, like more insistent in Beethoven's Fifth, became the villain of my epic fantasy series.
Nice.
Because, oh, Earl Koenig, the Elf King. I'll make an evil Elf King. Oh, and idea came from idea. All because I thought it was really cool to learn the folktale behind Beethoven's Fifth.
That's like, I would like that.
So yeah, that kind of sort of connects to the next question I want to pose, which have any of you used kind of tools for inspiration? So for example, there is the story deck cards that have come out fairly recently, the world building deck. I come out of a very old TTRPG, tabletop role-playing game background. I will just say it's since Jimmy Carter was in the White House when I started. So like there are things that I've drawn from Traveler and other things I've drawn from history, but are there in terms of tools that you've used, have you played with anything like that? Or I know some folks there was a fantasy card game called Everway that had these decks of absolutely beautiful cards with incredible images on them that they would then use to come up with ideas for their fantasy role-playing games. Have you ever played with anything like that? I know there are people that have played with the I Ching and other stuff, but
All the freaking time. No, go ahead. I don't want to.
Oh,
Yeah.
go right ahead.
Okay.
I'm in it. Yeah.
This is very exciting because I love this. I have a large collection of tarot cards and the lore engine and story builder, and Mythulu is another one that I really like. That I can use inspiration from the art, because again, I don't visualize. I don't picture things in my head. I have, it's called aphasia. But I love looking at things to use them as inspiration. And I have this novel series where I'm world building some things from the past, like basically the gods. And I just took a bunch of Mythulu cards and was like, okay, what would they be? And, kind of things like that. Like sometimes I'm like, okay, I need a motivation for this villain, and I'll just pull some tarot cards. And I either use the meaning of the card or the art on the card or a combination. Or I'll just keep pulling things until something jives and it's like, oh, he's jealous. Okay, that's why he's doing what he's doing. And that helps jive. It gets me out of my own patterns in my own head. And so I'm just constantly playing with stuff. Like I love stuff like that.
I'm gonna start using that. I really like that. I was just looking at some tarot cards the other day, and I was like, "Man, these are such great stories."
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I likewise utilize other art mediums,
Mhm.
specifically TV shows and movies. I have a newer song on Spotify and all streaming platforms called Phoenix Rising: The Space Cowboy, and it's very heavily influenced by Doctor Who,
Mm.
and the concept that he has all this space to run. And he does. He really tries to run away from his problems, and so that's what inspired that. Seeing him travel across, universes and planets, and just that, like, he cannot run away from his problems. They always catch up to him.
Mhm.
And so using those art mediums to like inspire something in me has really been helpful, like you're saying.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, have you ever played with any kind of toys like that, or no?
Not really.
Yeah, just
My games are all in my head.
People say he's a dreamer, but he's not the only one.
well shot there. So you mentioned the getting things from the Beethoven's Fifth, and I know personally, like we also talk about, like, we get ideas from everywhere. I'm personally a fan. I love taking elements from different eras of history, and
Mhm.
it helps to know a lot about different parts of history and to be able to slap them together, or pull. Oh, I need a character like this. Oh, I need an incompetent but seemingly good military commander. I got George McClellan, from the Civil War. I can, without like making a parody of that, or straight copy, um, like David Weber does in the Honor Harrington
Mhm.
books. Like, that's one of the weakest parts of that whole book, or that whole series. But to pull those things from that, or sometimes, like, article in the New Scientist, and when those things combine, where are the places that you look to, for your personal things? You mentioned other art and things like that. What are the other places that are kind of the pools that have fed into the big pool in your head?
DH and I were talking about before we kicked off this panel, the importance of history and research and the things around us. And I really appreciate that we were talking about that, because that's just gravy information out there, that you could use to tie in with your story. I'm working on this short fiction right now, and it's all about solar flares. And what better time than right now to be having the research, and it's fresh and new, and they're kicking off all this stuff, but also, looking back, like the Carrington event in the mid 1800s, that was a huge solar flare, and finding out that telegraph stations were catching on fire, and what would that look like if it was one step higher than a Carrington level event now?
Mhm.
Wow, ooh, let me write about that. So yeah, it was just, I really enjoyed that conversation we were having.
So what Xavier was, if I'm pronouncing your name right, was saying is, I had written, not under my pen name, but under my own name, a nonfiction book about the Ellis Island immigrant experience. After publishing that, I thought about what would immigration be like to Mars. So I wrote a reverse Ellis Island experience, nowhere to go but Mars, taking America's huddled masses to the Death Valley spaceport to Mars, steerage class. Ideas come from different things, and if I'm doing research, I'm going to see where else it can take me. Not every idea is the greatest of ideas, but there are times when there was an anthology called a year ago that Jen's aware of in memory of Eric Flint. They were looking for alt history stories. And I said, I'm not going to deal with alternate history, a bit of luck. I don't know anything, except I've always wanted to write about Robin Hood.
Mhm.
And I have been to Richard the Lionheart's palace in the Holy Land. And I do know something that most people don't know about Richard the Lionheart. What if I have introduced Robin Hood and a rabbi as Friar Tuck? and really take Maid Marian to somewhere else. Oh, doing the research. Friar Tuck isn't in the stories, and Maid Marian isn't for 200 years of the legend. So why couldn't I replace them with somebody else and create an alternate timeline? The editor who looked at it says, "You're writing the beginning of a novel." Well, you know what that means, folks. I'm gonna one day be writing that novel. So that's just gonna jar in my head for a while because it's something unique to me writing and my interest. And I'd be able to write a Robin Hood story that no one else would ever do. Another version of Ivanhoe kind of thing.
So Jen, like what feeds your creative
Oh.
pool?
So if you're aware of what Clifton's strengths are, I'm a #1 input. I am constantly into everything. I love random bits of history. As I'm a member of Smithsonian Associates because they have like all of these like 1 hour webinars that are really cheap that are just like random topics and stuff. I love history. I love all of the weird things. People were weird. People have been weird since the beginning of time, and they always do weird things or have weird beliefs. And it's always kind of fascinates me, and that kind of drives my attention. I'm the worst alternate history writer ever because I want to pick like the weirdest obscure things. So you really need to know the history. Like I have to tell you all of this stuff before you understand what I changed, because it's like usually some weird obscure thing. I'm like, oh, well, what if the Russians didn't adopt Christianity in 980 and it's now the same, now it's the 1700s and, like nobody knows this. So, so none of those are really good for anybody but me. But I love writing in different time periods and trying to figure out like, what did people think? What did they do? How did they live their lives? And when they have these weird beliefs, like, why do they do that? Like, why is that a thing? I don't know, because people are weird and it's great. And that's the best part.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, what's the saying, to an Englishman, 100 miles is long and to an American, 100 years is a long time.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that to an Englishman, 100 miles is a great distance. And, there are people I know that have commutes that are 100 miles.
Right.
Those people are nuts, but that's another thing. But yeah, it's like humans, and especially a lot of people don't think about the fact that even within the era of Christianity, that's not been the majority religion, and people have had all sorts of things, some of which have been saved, some of which lost. But then you go back even further to, it's crazy how much of our current math comes through the Sumerians. That's where the 12s and 60s come from, because that's how they counted on their fingers. It's just really bonkers that way. One thing that you talked about, you mentioned DH, is like, and it's probably like our last real question before we get into kind of final thoughts and wrapping up. When you get that idea, that is, and that's the famous one, oh no, this is the first chapter of a novel. What tells you, do you have an idea when you're working with it? What tells you what length do you think this is worth pushing into?
Well,
Is this a short story? Is this a novel? Is this a novelette?
originally I thought I was writing a short story, and then when the editor made the comment, I go, oh yes, I'm doing a modern version of another version of Ivanhoe, which I very rarely read or watched, but has pieces that have resonated with me. But I do have, there's so many pieces to what I'm thinking of, and even things I put into my short story of where the story could go. It's a novel.
Yeah.
At minimum, it's a novella, but knowing me, it's a full novel.
So what kind of did that one, in that case, it took someone else telling you that was the case?
Someone else telling me that they thought the idea was much bigger than what I.
Because you were too close to it.
Yeah.
Do you ever have that moment where you recognize as you're working with the idea that this is probably a short story? This is all this is as far as I can take this.
Well, for years, I never wrote novellas.
Hmm.
I went to a session on the wonderfulness of writing a novella. And then people started talking about reader magnets, and novellas are the perfect length for a reader magnet. And next thing I know, I've written a three-part novel in 3 novellas that actually I just have to put together and make a novel form for a print edition. But it's just like I have another book to a series, a prequel.
And yeah, which is a long-standing tradition here in our genre. That's happened, you know, a long
Yeah,
time.
and I didn't think I had a great idea until I started writing it, and I go, oh, there's another one here and another one here. Oh, I've got 3. Eventually, this will be a novel
Mhm.
because they just all string together perfectly.
Gotcha.
And I'll probably tie them in to a Kickstarter. I mean, there's different things that start wrapping around, all connecting. And I don't have to keep reinventing wheels when I have something else that I can repackage that I've offered for free, and I can offer it in a different way so it has more value. But when people see how things fit together, my mind keeps going. And then there's things that aren't related that you can offer in a Kickstarter. Now, oh, maybe I need to do a collection of my published stories, or maybe I should be sending the story out again. Is there another call that this would be perfect for?
Gotcha.
So
I just want to circle back to our question because we don't have too much time left. So for Jen or Tavair, like what maybe gives you, as you're working with an idea, that gives you an idea of what how big a project that is that you're working on?
For me, it's the scope of the problem of the story question.
Mhm.
So, and whether or not there's only one.
Mhm.
So like, you know, a novel is going to have multiple threads running through it. And if I can keep that to one thread, you know, then I could do it as a short story. And so, and it's something that has to be, you know, resolved without a lot of, you know, you can't do subplots. You can't, you know, if I'm going to do a short story, if I'm going to do a novel, then I'm going to have a lot of similar questions like, oh, and I like using mystery as an example because I like reading mysteries, but also because it's easy to understand. It's like, you know, okay, so you have the murder mystery, but then you have the mystery of like what this person is doing and what that person is doing. And then, you know, and then you get like the unrelated murder. And then so you have all of those things in a mystery novel where you might just focus on one little thing in a short story.
Tavair, any thoughts?
I think I resonate with that bucket of things that kind of go together, you know. I got all these puzzle pieces. Now I just need to like color in the other spots that I don't have and put the puzzle together. But yeah, just having like a nice robust amount of related ideas to that, and I'm, you know, feeling like, oh yeah, this could be a little bit something bigger, you know, having the eggs and the milk and the flour, and you're like, oh well, have enough for a cake here.
Yeah, Mary Robinette Kowal has a thing. She used to call it the mice quotient, and now she has a different name for it. But it was the idea you milieu and the ideas and the number of characters, and if you have a certain number, they seem to fit into, you know, different lengths. Like if you have more than 3 characters, you're probably not talking about a short story, or at least people that you're going to get into depth with, or 3 POV characters, unless you're doing something kind of strange structurally. So just have a couple of minutes for just final thoughts and or where to find. Or do we have any questions? We have 3 minutes, so it would be quick questions. Yes.
Getting rid of drafts and starting over. Do you just throw the whole thing out? Have you ever done that? Just throw the whole thing out and start over again, like reapproaching your.
I once.
Okay, so let me repeat the question just for the audience also, because so the question is for drafts, do you ever throw out like an entire draft, or do you salvage parts of it? You know, what do you do if you need to start over? Okay.
I cut 70 pages out of a novel that I felt belonged somewhere else. 2 years later, I said, oh, I've got that 70 pages. And I wrote another book about it with all around it. So I kept it, but not in the book it was supposed to come out with originally.
sometimes I have thrown things away, just like it's not working, so. I'll just start over and try something different. And in that case, like I might keep the core idea, but just because I'm going to be approaching it completely different, I throw the words away, but it's just practice. So it's not that bad. There's no wasted writing. So.
I'm a lot more intentioned about how to keep those things that you're not ready for, or you want to throw out. Just having a specific place for those, because if you throw it out and then a couple years later you're like, oh man, that was something that I did want to explore, then you're kicking yourself and you can't go back. So yeah, just I have a place that I keep those ideas. It's a folder on Google Drive called Half-Baked Ideas. So
I have the boneyard.
oh,
Yeah.
I love it.
Like, don't throw them away, but I'm like, I know that's not working, and most of the time I don't go back to them because they weren't working for a reason, but I call it the boneyard.
Yeah. And it varies. I have thrown out an entire like 40,000 words of something. Because I recognized that I was taking the wrong direction. It wasn't the same work I was working on. It was something else. Because I recognized that it was sometimes you're telling the wrong story, or you come to realize later, I thought I was telling this person's story and I'm telling that person's story instead. Which I don't know if anybody could get away with a Great Gatsby kind of technique anymore. I don't know if you could get away with playing a narrator. You can kind of do it. I mean,
Great Gatsby didn't get away with it until it came out again 20 years after he died.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I'd like for these things just to see while I'm present. But yeah, so it varies. But like I never delete the things. They're always saved somewhere. And because again, you never know when you're going to be able to recycle that concept. I did actually, the book that I'm writing now, I have thrown out 2 other openings to it because I was starting, Dong San has this great saying, too many authors start their story at the beginning where they should be starting where it gets interesting. And I was starting at the beginning because I'm an old role-playing game. And so I'm starting with the Shadowrun and meeting Mr. Johnson and getting the story thing where, the adventurers meeting together. And so that's not where it needed to start. So any final thoughts from anyone here? Very quickly, because we're
I'll just
at
say,
time.
all ideas are good if you want to play with them and they're exciting to you. And I think most people don't trust that their ideas are good. But if you have it and it's interesting to you, then play with it.
I'm in the dealer's room, happy to answer questions tomorrow and Sunday and Monday. I apologize for having to have gone down to the front desk at their repeated urging to immediately come down to talk to them. They have apologized to me for having been pulled out of the panel. But I apologize to you that I had to figure out what was going on at the front desk.
Hope things are short.
None really. I second what you said, Jen. Yeah. Keep those ideas, keep them flowing, explore them, have fun with them.
And the one point I'll add is be wide read or wide viewing. YouTube is great as long as you're not like starting to get Jordan Peterson videos or something. But there's a wealth of information out there. And you never know when the thing that you come across is going to spark an idea, and suddenly you're writing about hang gliding smart dog search and rescue operations. That's it. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all our panelists for a great and hopefully a great discussion. Thank you to the audience and thank you for your questions.
Short story, and
we will see you all.
I'll be around at panels the rest of the time.